Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's brief episode. We're going to be talking about vampires. If you tried to tune into the first attempt to do this, I apologize. Technical issues. We're rolling correctly now. First, some housekeeping to take care of. I just finished videoing, and it will be up sometime in the near future, a reaction video where I did a bunch of clips from TV shows and movies and YouTube channels and gave my opinions on them. We need to do some editing to put it all together, which is also what causes the technical problems here. But you'll be getting to see that sometime in the coming week or two, hopefully. Also, if you are not aware, I am currently attempting to raise money to go to Romania myself with my friend and sometimes guest on the show, Dacre Stoker, the great grandnephew of Bram Stoker. If I can do this, I am going to be doing some videos from over there as live, hopefully, as internet connection permits. I'm going to do some EVPs that I can play back at various sites, including his Dracula's Castle, the place he may or may not have been buried, and things of that nature. It's all very exciting. If this sounds like something interesting, or if you just have some money to spare and you want to help somebody out, please go to the link in the description. I have wanted to go see Dracula's Castle ever since I was a little kid. We're talking more than 40 years here, people. So I'd really appreciate if anyone who can help me does. Please do so. At any rate, to get to the topic at hand. So vampires. Vampires kind of have a special place in my heart. I've been fascinated by vampire folklore since I was a little kid. Fascinated by Dracula since I was a little kid. I've always been reading about it, been curious about it, been reading vampire fiction. And it's really quite interesting to me because there are certain myths that you can find variations of all over the world. Nearly every culture has stories of humans that turn into animals, or for that matter, for a number of animals that turn into humans. Most cultures have stories of dragons. Pretty much every culture has stories of spirits of the dead that come back to visit the living, including cultures that don't necessarily have gods in the sense that we would think of them. But one of those ideas that you find almost everywhere, as far back as recorded history goes, is what you might call the hungry dead. It is the idea that the dead come back to feast upon the living. Most often, this feasting takes the form of drinking blood. In some stories, they feed on flesh. In some stories, they feed on breath. Some get more abstract with the feeding on life force and life energy and things of that nature, or the soul. But that for some reason, either as physical beings or spirits, they come back to feed on the living. You can find versions of this in Native American folklore. You can find versions of this in fairy folklore from the British Isles. Fun fact, many people, when you think of fairies, you think of spirits or physical beings that are their own distinct thing, but actually in the folklore, many people believed that they were spirits of the dead, particularly people who died without being baptized or people who died before Christianity came to the British Isles. And some of those people required blood. Even Greek mythology. If you read the Iliad, the Odyssey, particularly, when Odysseus goes to the realm of Hades to speak to the spirits of the dead, he has to sacrifice a goat. And the spirits of the dead come up and they drink the blood, and the blood is what gives them the ability to speak. In many ancient cultures, in general, really, blood has a very powerful symbolic importance. The Bible says the blood is the life. In the various religions that known as voodoo and Santeria and things like that, when you sacrifice an animal, usually you eat the meat, but the blood is left as an offering to the gods. In Mesoamerican cultures, for that matter, Aztecs and Mayans, the blood sacrificed the gods. The blood is very important. In Christianity, particularly Catholicism, during the communion, the wine becomes the blood of Christ. For that matter, in the Last Supper, Jesus, take of this, drink of it, for this is my blood. Blood has this very powerful significance. And yeah, a lot of people believed that the dead could rise under certain circumstances to seek the blood of the living. The word vampire itself first seems to be used. One of the earliest times I've seen it used is actually a text that's talking about Vlad the Impaler. which is the word wampire, Wampyr, in reference to Vlad. Now, it is not saying that Vlad is a vampire in the sense that we would think of it. It means that Vlad was bloodthirsty in the conventional, very violent, loved war, loved to kill people sense. There's, of course, another word from German that's very well known, that's Nosferatu, which is also commonly associated with vampires. But actually, if it means anything, and apparently there's even some debate about whether or not it was a made-up word, it's more like Plague Walker. It was more of a typhoid Mary, someone who was diseased, who carried the disease around with them and infected others. It wasn't really this undead creature. There's another interesting thing I found out recently. Undead. Whenever you say vampire, zombie, lich, you think of undead. From what I understand, you can thank Bram Stoker for that. Because the original name for the book, what does undead mean in the simplest terms? Not dead. Well, then who's undead? I'm undead. You're undead. Because we're not dead, which is another way of saying we're alive. So the original name of the book was The Dead Undead. Because Dracula was dead, but not dead. And then that got mixed into vampire folklore, and we got this idea of the undead, as we understand it today. Something that we're thinking about. So they have a lot of different powers in a lot of different cultures. Most of the time, they're thought to be some kind of shapeshifter. Wolves are common enough in Eastern European folklore. Cats are actually pretty common. Horses show up in some legends. Birds, particularly owls or ravens. Bats do not appear in most vampire folklore, though I've seen some rumors I need to do some more research on, that there were legends of blood-drinking creatures that turned into bats in Ireland. But we do know where Bram Stoker got the idea that Dracula turned into a bat. And for this, we can thank Charles Darwin, believe it or not. Charles Darwin, during his voyages, stopped off in South America, and while he was there, he made note of and wrote in his books about a type of bat that feeds on blood, which we, of course, now know as the vampire bat. And this idea inspired Bram to have Dracula turn into a bat. So it wasn't until very late, until the 19th century and the Voyage of the Beagle and Charles Darwin, that vampires got really heavily associated with bats. Which is ironic because bats have kind of a dark reputation in most folklore. It seems like a natural combination to have vampires turn into them, but yeah, it just isn't there. Usually have some ability, some degree of invulnerability. A lot of the ways actually that we associate with killing vampires aren't so much ways to kill a vampire, they're ways to stop a vampire. You drive a stake through its heart, but you don't just drive a stake through its heart. You drive a stake through its heart and physically pin the vampire to the earth so it can't get back up. You nail its head to the side of the coffin. You cut its head off and you put its head between its legs so it can't reach it. You bury it face down instead of face up so that if it tries to dig its way out of the grave, it digs deeper instead of farther out, instead of getting out. You carry it past a series of crossroads so that it gets lost and it can't find its way home to feed on people. You do all these things that won't kill it, but will confuse it or eliminate its ability to harm people. The other common way that is probably the closest way to a surefire way to kill a vampire, and it's the most common way you find in actual accounts of vampirism, is you just burn the body. Burn it to ash. Sometimes you burn it to ash and you cut the head off, you burn the head and the body separately, you cast them into separate fast-flowing streams. Sometimes you cut the heart out and burn the heart. There's a whole bunch of different ways. But you burn the body. That is the traditional way to get rid of a vampire. Excuse me. And these ideas are actually pretty common even up until relatively recently, even in places you wouldn't expect. There are vampire stories, for example, that you can find in New England. There's a wonderful channel I highly recommend called Ask a Mortician. It just did a video about the New England vampire panic. Go check her out. She goes into more detail than I'm going to go into here because this is a relatively short video. I'm going to probably try to end it in relatively near future. But there's a woman by the name of Mercy Brown who very famously in Rhode Island was thought to have been a vampire. Her body was dug up and burned to stop the epidemic. So yeah, vampires are spirits. Often enough, by the way, they are spirits. Stories talk about the vampire attacking people, but the body is still in the ground. There's even vampires that simply sit and lay in their coffin and chew on their funeral shroud, and that causes illness. They pass through walls. They do other things that physical people can't do. So one theory about what vampires are is that they're basically a type of ghost that feeds on the life force of the living to continue their existence. If you read a lot of ghost stories, they're not very old. Most ghosts are only, from the last few decades, Victorian era at the latest. You don't hear a lot about like caveman ghosts, Roman ghosts, Babylonian ghosts. They're usually relatively recent. This could be one possible explanation of why, is because they need energy from some external source to feed them. One occultist, for example, suggests one of the weirder aspects of vampire folklore is that if you sprinkle seeds in front of them, they have to stop and count the seeds before they pursue you. And that seeds, because their life, the beginning of life, have a large amount of this energy. The vampires stop to feed on the easy energy rather than chase more difficult prey. I'm not saying I necessarily buy this. It also ties in a lot to some misconceptions about vampires. I almost forgot to talk about misconceptions. One of the biggest mistakes people make about vampires is people think that vampires are creatures of darkness. You have to, if they go out during the day, they burst into flame and die. That idea was invented by the movies. It really starts with the movie Nosferatu. You don't find it anywhere in vampire folklore. Usually, when the sun goes up, they go back to sleep and they go back to the coffin. Some vampires are actually active during the days. From noon, there's stories of vampires that are active from noon to midnight. And things of that nature. So no, sunlight does not kill vampires. Crosses don't do much against them either. That was an idea largely started by Bram Stoker, connected vampires to another possible explanation of what they are, which is that it's a corpse possessed by a demon. Or at least in Dracula's case, he was a human who made a deal with the devil. So that demonic influence makes them vulnerable to corpses. That's not really something common to the folklore. So no, sticking a cross in a vampire's face isn't going to do a whole lot in legends. Garlic, yes. Wolf's bane, yes. Silver, yes. Believe it or not, silver is not a werewolf thing, and I'll do a video on werewolves at some point in the future. Silver is a vampire thing, believe it or not. It's usually very difficult. You have to shoot the vampire, and then you have to basically keep them out of direct moonlight because moonlight will bring them back to life, and various other conditions. It's easier just, again, you burn the body. Sorry, I got a stuffy nose. And that leads to an interesting question, which is, are vampires real? For that matter, do I believe in vampires? I'm not really one to say no, believe it or not. I'm not one to say yes. I've never seen a vampire. I don't know anyone who's ever seen a vampire. I've heard secondhand accounts from reliable sources about people who have seen the dead walk in places like Haiti, which relates to zombie traditions, which is a whole other video, easily. But nobody has seen a vampire. That said, spirits do feed on energy, particularly emotional energy. Particularly violent spirits feed on negative emotions. If you're in the middle of demonic haunting, the more afraid you are, the more angry you are, the more you fight with your family, the more powerful the spirit becomes. That might be the origin of the vampire myth, is that spirits do gain power from emotional energy. People do see, there are various myths even of people getting sick because of contact with ghosts. Lord Ruin comments, I've seen vampires. I've seen those vile blood-sucking fiends. They're called politicians. Lord Ruin, I'm extremely offended. And I have to remind you at the moment that this channel is not a place for hate speech. How dare you compare the noble vampire to politicians? Shame on you. There are some things even a vampire won't do. Hang your head, sir. Hang your head. But more seriously, I think vampires might be a type of spirit that feeds off of humans. Again, I've never seen one. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they are actual corpses possessed by demons that get out of the ground and attack people. Maybe the reason we don't see them anymore, something with the embalming process makes the corpse uninhabitable. Or I don't know. He seemed to like that particular exchange. Welcome to both of you, by the way. Maybe there are vampires all over the place. There is, I hesitate to use the term because he wasn't worthy of it, but a parapsychologist named Stephen Kaplan, I won't call him a doctor, he didn't earn the doctorate, who was famous for saying that Amityville Horror never happened. Okay, I'm almost more offended that you'd suggest that Lestat was a vampire. And I'll let Lestat pass, but so help me, if you bring up anything to do with Twilight, you're getting a permaban. Vampires don't sparkle. I don't like Anne Rice, by the way, folks. I don't like. I like just about everyone. I despise Twilight, but I'm not a big fan of Anne Rice either for similar reasons. I lost my train of thought, and I blame you entirely, Lord Ruin. And again, this is a comment. I mean, the tour I'm looking to take, again, link to the GoFundMe in the description, which is, and by the way, I highly recommend going if you can afford it. It's not terribly expensive. Would be going to Romania, going to Transylvania, going to Castle Ponare, which was Vlad Dracula's actual castle, going to Snagov Monastery, a monastery that he built that is supposed to have been where he was buried. Going to Bran Castle, the one you see in all the TV specials as Dracula's castle, though he never actually lived there. It's an absolutely amazing opportunity. And if there are vampires anywhere in the world, Transylvania is the place to start looking. And if I get over there, I'll take a look and see it. And maybe like I said, maybe I'll find one and I'll bring him on the air and do an interview with a vampire on YouTube. Don't hold your breath. I don't think that's going to happen, even if I do get over there. But it's another incentive. Wouldn't that be interesting? Especially introduce him to Dacre and see what vampires think of Brahms' book. But that's going to probably just about do it for tonight. Like I said, keep an eye out. Sometime soon, we will edit and get up the video of me reacting to various clips from movies and TV shows that I filmed earlier tonight. It's going to take a little bit of time because we have the clips in one place and my reaction in another place. So Amisha's got to get out the scissors and the duct tape and the glue and put everything together, construct everything to turn it into something watchable. More videos coming up. I want to apologize for the fact I haven't been on a lot lately. Keep saying I'm going to be on more, but I keep getting caught up in all the other things I'm doing with my spare time at the moment. I'm still researching my book on the Salem trials, which continues to get weirder the longer I read. And I've got even more. One of these nights when I do the show, I'll bring in and show you guys the amount of research material I'm accumulating. I mean, I have a book about Yay Sick, which is all the trial transcripts. Then the Malleus Maleficarum, which is the Catholic Church How to Hunt Witch book. The Demonology by King James I, which is a big book about witches. More Wonders of the Invisible World, which was a skeptical book about the Salem witch trials. Wonders of the Invisible World, which is by Con and Increase Mather in defense of the witch trials. On Witchcraft, which is by Con Mather, again, about in defense of the witch trials. A Modest Inquiry into the Nature of Witchcraft by Reverend John Hale, who you may know from the Crucible, who was a Puritan preacher who was involved in the trials and ultimately realized they were quite horrible. And it's about how he thinks the devil was involved, but the people were innocent. It should be a really interesting book when I get done, and I'll be getting into it more as time goes on. But that's going to do it for tonight. I want to thank everybody who's listening now or who listens in the future for joining me. As always, I am your host, Kevin Mears, demonologist, paranormal investigator, and the Paranormal Encyclopedia. And this is me, folks, saying have a good night and God bless. Oh, and a belated happy Thanksgiving since that just passed. Good night, Laura Root, and good night, Megan D.